بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. Sorry for the delay. I just came back from where did I come from? Yes. Where? Scarborough. That's the one. So I was a bit late, and there you go. Alhamdulillah, I'm here. So I'm going to be talking about not brother seating or sister seating, but rather I'm going to be talking about is the belief in God rational. Now, we could be here all day, okay? We could spend hours on this topic, write books and volumes on this topic. So what my aim is to get you to think. Because I think, unfortunately, in today's society, we don't think about these critical issues anymore. I was speaking at Scarborough and I asked this lady, why do you have a certain position on something? She was like, because I decide to believe in it. And I felt that was a very irrational position to take, because you assume basically that your mere decision gives you grounding for your position on something. So I gave her a thought experiment, which was, right, I decide that I'm the president of the world and I'm the ultimate moral authority, and whatever I do is moral. So even if I were to kill you, it's morally good, because anything I do is moral, because I am the source of morality. I said, is that a position you'll accept? She's like, basically, of course not. And I said, so there you go. So it's not about deciding to believe in something. That's not your philosophy. There is something else, because you have more boundaries. Now, you may think, what am I talking about? Basically, the conversation was trying to make her think about her own philosophical position. Different definitions of atheism. What I'm going to adopt is basically something called atheistic naturalism, philosophical naturalism. Because many atheists, not all of them of course, we don't want to otherize, but generally speaking, just for argument's sake, many atheists hold a certain philosophy. And that philosophy is called philosophical naturalism. What is philosophical naturalism? Philosophical naturalism is the philosophical worldview that there is no divine, that there is no supernatural, and that everything can be reduced or explained by physical processes. So let me repeat. Atheistic philosophical naturalism is that there is no divine, no supernatural, everything can be explained via physical processes. Now that position itself, in my view, cannot account for our assumption, which is a healthy assumption, that we have the ability to reason. Okay? So from that point of view, atheism is contrary to reason. Let me explain. So what do I mean by reason? What I mean by reason is our ability to think, to use our cognitive faculties, to formulate arguments, to infer. What's an example of an inference? An example of an inference is, I've observed 1,000 white sheep, therefore all sheep are white, right? That's an inference. We use this in science all the time. In actual fact, most scientific theories can be reduced to some type of inference, okay? There's some induction going on. So that's a form of reasoning. Another form of reasoning is what you call deductive reasoning. Deductive reasoning is where the conclusion necessarily follows from its premises, okay? A deductive argument is where the conclusion necessarily follows from its premises. Let me give you an example. Number one, John has observed 5 sheep. Number 2, the sheep that John has observed are white. Number 3, therefore, some sheep are white. This is a deductive argument. The conclusion necessarily follows from the premises. There is no other conclusion from that point of view, right? That conclusion is necessitated by the premises. The premises guarantee the truth of the conclusion. So what I want to do is just write it down, because we're going to use this now to show why atheistic philosophical naturalism cannot explain our ability to do deductive reasoning, to have philosophical insights. In other words, to have rational insights, as Professor Lawrence Bonjour said. Right, so let's write them down. Apologies in advance for my handwriting. Number one, John. It's not clear? All right. Or a different color. So John has observed 5 sheep, right? So the sheep John has observed are white, therefore some sheep are white. Okay, so this is a deductive argument. The conclusion necessarily follows from the premises, okay? And what's very interesting here is that a deductive argument is not only true because of the meaning of the premises. It's not true by virtue of the meaning of each of the premises. It's necessarily true because of the connection. There's a logical relation between the properties in the statements, okay? So what does logical properties mean? It basically means the words, okay? So John, sheep, right? White. So there is some kind of logical link or some kind of connection between the logical properties in the statements, okay? So we don't conclude this necessarily from the point of view of the meaning of the statements. We conclude this because there is a relation between the properties within the statement, like John, sheep, white, okay? So in very simple language, we're having an insight in our minds. We see into a conclusion, all right? So imagine there is a bus driver. There's a cognitive bus driver in our brains, right? And he or she is driving the bus, and he or she sees into the destination. That's what's happening in the brain, right? So my argument here is you can't explain this or account for this if you adopt atheistic philosophical naturalism. Because atheistic philosophical naturalism states there's no supernatural or divine, and everything can be explained by physical processes. But things that are physical are what you call contingent. What does contingent mean? There's nothing necessary about it. It could have been different. It could have been otherwise. It didn't have to exist. But we're saying that there are necessary conclusions. So how can we account for necessary conclusions using contingent things? Meaning it could have been otherwise. And what's also interesting is if you think about physical processes as they are defined, physical processes are blind in essence. Meaning they don't have any intention or purpose behind them. Nothing is driving a physical process along. It just happens. It is. Fundamentally, the nature of reality, according to atheistic naturalism, is just electrons just whizzing around, right? But we have the ability to see into a conclusion. How can we have that ability if it's just a result of blind, random, non-rational physical processes? So from this point of view, atheistic philosophical naturalism cannot really account for our ability to reason. So if I want to describe atheistic philosophical naturalism from this point of view, I would describe it as a bus driver that's blind, thinking that he or she could reach the destination with his blindfolds on, right? Whereas theism, the belief in an all-aware, all-knowing, wise creator, that's compatible with our ability to reason because it makes sense. The whole metaphysic, the whole ontology of everything, it makes sense that there is a wise, knowing creator who created the universe with human beings to have rational faculties, with the ability to see into a conclusion. Because a theistic worldview doesn't believe in a blind universe. It believes in things that are directed, right? So from this point of view, it just makes sense that theism is far more compatible with our ability to have rational insights, and atheistic naturalism is not compatible with our ability to have rational insights. Simple as that. And the irony is, many atheists, especially online, they basically claim to use reason to deny God. But hold on a second. Before you could open the door, right, to walk into the house of reason, you need a key. And that key that you're holding at the moment doesn't fit, right? Because there's no God there. You need God to open the door so you can start enjoying your rational faculties and start to do amazing rational insights, right? And there are responses, by the way. I'm not saying, hey, here's the whole argument. You know, some would argue, you know what? This doesn't make sense because reason and deductive arguments are just our own human constructs to make sense of the world. There's no such thing as, you know, truth with a capital T. You know, there are those type of arguments, though, which I think are very unhelpful, especially when people think, you know, they have a Darwinian understanding of truth, which I think is very false. Because when we talk about truth, we talk about something that is real, that it's a representation of reality. It's a representation of the state of affairs. But from a Darwinian perspective, truth is only linked to survival, right? And I think that's a huge problem. And they say, yeah, look, we could explain our rational faculties because the Darwinian mechanism, you know, it teaches us that we develop these rational faculties because they helped us survive. But there is no necessary link here because you can have falsehood and that can help you survive as well. Like Professor O'Brien and Professor O'Hare and others, they talk about this issue. For example, imagine I was a jungle person going into the jungle and I believe that every mushroom was poisonous. Every mushroom was poisonous, right? Do I survive? I survive, right? But it's false. It's not true that every mushroom is poisonous. So it follows I can adopt a falsehood. I could adopt a falsehood and still survive. So there is no necessary link between using reason, truth, and survival. So does this make sense so far? Any questions?
I'm lost.
You're lost?
Can you simplify it?
Yeah. Well, this was the hardest part today anyway, so don't worry. The way to simplify is, imagine I'm a taxi driver. I pick up two passengers, okay? Their names are premise number 1 and premise number 2. Or if you want to be a bit more funny, premise number 1 and premise number 2. And what I'm doing is I pick them up and they give me the destination and I drive and I can see where I'm going and I take them to the destination. The other scenario is I'm a taxi driver, but before I start the car and take premise 1 and 2 to the destination, I put a blindfold on. Who's more likely to go to the destination? Taxi driver number 1 or number 2? Number 1. What I'm saying is, from a theistic point of view, we believe we can see into a conclusion because the way we understand the world is that things are directed, right? So it makes sense that you could go to your destination. But according to atheistic naturalism, they can't account for the fact that we can see into a conclusion to drive the premises to a certain conclusion. So it's like a taxi driver being blindfolded, right? It's the easiest way of putting it. Sorry?
is it not irrational?
Do you think in which way? In which way?
In a way that like I'm going to a destination, but there is no destination at all. Maybe you're going to the wrong destination.
Yeah.
So that can be as bad as not seeing.
Yeah, I don't understand what your point is. Sorry.
My point is, you're saying like, if we believe in God, we have someone to direct our conclusions. But at the same time, you say someone who doesn't.
No, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is, the belief in theism, and that worldview is fundamentally different from atheistic naturalism. Theism meaning that things are directed, for sure, but also that behind the structure of the universe and behind physical reality is a creator that created physical reality with human beings who are able to think and use their rational faculties because it came from an all-wise, all-knowing being. So from that point of view, rationality can come from rationality. But atheistic naturalism, the fundamental essence of reality is just electrons whizzing around without any purpose or direction, right? And generally speaking, those things themselves don't intrinsically have rationality. They don't intrinsically have the ability to see into a conclusion. So what I would say is, if you were to choose between two worldviews, which one would be far more compatible with our ability to have rational insights? Because this obviously has a transcendent dimension, because we don't believe this conclusion to be necessarily true as a result of just the semantic value of the premises. We believe it to be necessarily true because there's some kind of logical connection between the properties. But the point here is, how can you justify this logical connection using the physical world? There's nothing in the physical world that can give you the logical connection between these properties. Is there something happening in our mind that's aphysical? That's the point. And if the world was just based on physical processes, then we should be able to explain this. That's the point. Okay, you just made a statement. I want you to justify that statement. You said they both have equal weights. Why?
Because, if you look into the physical world and you do an experiment, then you come to a conclusion. Right? Whether you believe in God or
This has nothing to do with science. Science needs this before you do science. If you study the philosophy of science, which rarely people do, unfortunately, when you study the philosophy of science, you would see that science is a set of assumptions. Do you know? Does everyone know science is assumptions? Good. Good. Well done. So, yeah, you just put me off there. So one of the assumptions is that we have the ability to reason. That's the point. So to try and claim science can account for our ability to reason comprehensively is false. It's even like a dog trying to catch his tail, because it needs it first before you do any science, right? Another assumption of science is that there are external causal connections, right? There's quite a few assumptions, right? So this really is not a scientific question. It's more of a metaphysical one. That's not to say, of course, science can't deal with some metaphysics. There is some kind of overlap. But generally speaking, this is not a scientific question.
You mean to say that we are assuming there is a God and we infer the rest of the things?
No, it is not an argument for God. It is not an argument for anything. What I'm saying is, if you had a choice between theism and atheistic naturalism, it would be far more coherent to pick theism over atheistic naturalism. Because on the topic of us having rational insights and looking into a conclusion, seeing to a conclusion, having the ability to reason, that itself is better explained by theism rather than atheistic naturalism, which basically says the fundamental basis of reality is blindness. I need to do an experiment, my friend. So yeah, so a rational person would choose one worldview over another if that worldview comprehensively and coherently explains all of our assumptions. That's the point. Yes.
Please try to see if I am wrong here. I thought that a difference between atheist and a person who is believing God is that both of them are things that there are some reason or the things are directed, but a person who is believing God thinks that the person who put that laws are God, who creates everything.
Yeah, that's true.
And make this world, and so it makes the world that works in this kind of in this manner.
Yeah.
But an atheist thinks that okay, this world is generated by itself and it follows the laws of
Physics.
nature.
Yes.
So both of them are things that it is directed. The source of those laws are different in their mind.
No, because those laws are developed, but the laws have come into being, or they're there. They're either necessarily there, or they're there as a result of the randomness. But I would even say that atheists basically believe the universe just self-generated, because there's different views in cosmology, and many cosmologists either they don't really consider. Yeah, but there are 17 different models for the Big Bang, because we all read magazines. We think there's one model. There's 17. There's 17. Yeah, no, sure, but I do. Your point is very clever. It means you're thinking about it. It's an excellent point, but I would disagree from the point of view that they don't believe it's directed with any purpose or it's driven. Rather, these laws emerge as a result of just basically the fundamental nature of physical reality, which is just essentially electrons whizzing around. Unless they argue that the laws are just necessarily exist, which is a different topic. But anyway, so that's one point to think about, right? Another thing to think about, value. Why do you have value as a human being? What's the difference between yourself, ma'am, and a rat? Don't be offended. It's a thought experiment, okay? What's the difference between yourself? Okay, forget you, talk about me. What's the difference between me, Hamza, and the bacterium on the posterior of a dead rotting rat? Don't be cheeky. Yeah? So what's the difference? Yes? I have a brain. So, but why would that give me any special value? Because of the thing. But why is that a value? Yes?
Statistically speaking, you show, there is less of you than the bacteria.
Statistically speaking, there's less of me than bacteria. So who's more valuable? Yes?
Human beings are the only animals that ask questions.
Human beings are the only animals that can ask questions. But why is it just by asking questions it gives you more value? I could make a computer ask more questions than you, bro. Does that mean computers are more valuable than you? Yes. Sorry?
You have the ability
To make?
and take your own decision.
But why should that give me value? Yes. We are the learners. Well, robots could be learners. Yes.
As humans, we have the ability not to just live on these assumptions, just rationality.
Well, yeah, we could reason, but how does that give us value, though? Look, if I had a 6-foot chocolate bunny next to me and myself, and I shot the chocolate bunny and shot myself, why should you be more sad about me dying than the chocolate bunny dying? Why? I want to know why. You guys are supposed to be social justice warriors, for God's sake, in Canada, yeah? Right? Yes, sir.
I'd say in a worldview without God, there is no way for anyone to make that claim that you're better than them.
Yeah, absolutely. But why? See, the thing is, according to atheistic philosophical naturalism, which is there's no divine, no supernatural, things can be reduced to physical processes, then really, ultimately, forget your subjective feelings and, you're human, Hamza, and this and that. That's all like sentimentalisms. Go home, watch a movie and cry, yeah? We're using our reason here. If there's a crumbled bunny, chocolate bunny, and a crumbled Hamza, according to atheistic philosophical naturalism, it's just a rearrangement of the same physical stuff. Carbon, carbon. That's it. Why is there value? So you know our notion of human rights. Who believes in human rights? Put your feet up. Right? Put your hands up. Everybody, right? No? You don't believe in human rights? So human rights, right? That's why Jeremy Bentham said that's nonsense on stilts. Human rights, according to a Darwinian point of view, is nonsense on stilts. There's no metaphysical, ontological grounding for this thing. Right? Because if your worldview is that there is no divine, no supernatural, everything can be explained by physical processes, at least be consistent with your philosophical worldview. Follow through with the logical implications of your worldview. And that's why I don't really respect today's evangelical atheists, because they're glib. They don't follow through with their positions. Nietzsche followed through with his positions. Arthur Schopenhauer followed through with his positions. But today's atheists they want to have their cake and eat it, right? The popularizers. Human rights, all of this, that, and the other. Fine, these are great ideals and stuff, but at the end of the day, your worldview is saying something completely different. You believe things that could be just, reduced to physical processes that intrinsically don't have any value. So I want some kind of justification. If you were to adopt atheistic philosophical naturalism and you just assume or believe that things can be reduced by physical processes, how can that worldview justify things like universal human rights or things like human value? Yes, sir.
I don't think the two are necessarily exclusive. I think it's possible to believe that things like human rights and the social contract are evolved, and it's something that human societies developed because they work together much better when they cooperated, and they didn't kill each other over stupid things. Why do you think those two things are mutually?
Of course they are. You've used so many value judgments, better, cooperation, all of those things. Do those things make any sense if the world is just a kind of random, complex causal connections of different physical processes? That's my point.
Why don't they make sense to you? Does it make sense to what?
Yeah, I know, and they're wrong. Frankly, that's why they don't use their brains. Some people, they have political positions which they believe in, and remember, I'm not judging someone's belief here. I'm saying, given that you have those beliefs, are they justified with your philosophical worldview? There's a fundamental difference here. You misunderstood. I'm not saying an atheist is not allowed to have the belief in human rights. Of course they are. We believe as Muslims that we've been created with innate natures to adopt certain positions, right? That drives us spiritually and intuitively. This is not a problem. So I think you're a bit confused. It's not about the beliefs. I'm saying, given that you have beliefs X, Y, and Z, do they make sense under your philosophical worldview? That's the point. So if you had a choice between saving the life of a chocolate bunny or saving the life of a human being, why would you go for the human being? Yes, because you feel it intuitively, but what would your philosophical worldview say? Well, it's a bit indifferent, to be honest. Because there's one rearrangement of carbon and physical processes of another rearrangement of carbon and physical processes. Yes?
Could you, based on that argument, I'm just trying to think of other ways maybe
Sure.
it could be argued. If you made a hierarchy based on effect, like cause and effect. So for example, most of the animals and the plants and everything, they're in certain ecosystems. So certain things happen when an animal eats one animal, a certain cause happens, and it exists in a particular kind of cycle. But human beings, because we don't just rely on instinct, we have our free will, we have a certain higher responsibility. The fact that we have that capacity to choose necessitates that we have a certain...
Yeah, but responsibility, according to atheistic naturalism, is basically neurochemicals firing in your brain, which is further reduced to physical processes, which is further reduced to valueless electrons whizzing around.
No, I'm saying that if, let's say that particular arrangement of those electrons whizzing around gives a particular organism the capacity
To
to
do
have
what?
more influence on the rest of the
Yeah, but
universe.
why is influence valuable according to this worldview? That's the point.
Because one can affect more than the other. So for
But
example,
who cares? That's just that. See, what is like affect more than the other in this worldview? Just reduced to here's some physical processes being causally connected in some different way. Do you see my point? Yes, sir.
Wouldn't you say that to be able to have a value system first you have to rationalize it? So like if you're not rationalizing anything, you're not going to get to a value system. So like really both these points are the first point that you mentioned.
Yeah, that's true. That's why I just want to give you different points today to think about different points in different ways,
But like,
which you've been doing right now.
well, going back to the first point that you mentioned, I forget what you're saying about being able to rationalize. And I think any atheist wouldn't deny the fact that they, as beings, are able to rationalize. Well, I don't necessarily know what their argument would be if you were to ask them, how do you guys rationalize?
Well, look, yeah, that's a good question. I mean, look, they would even argue, look, can't computers rationalize, and aren't computers based on physical processes? And that's, I don't want to get into the big philosophical debates, but a key aspect of having the ability to reason is that they're meaningful rational insights. Computers can only rearrange symbols. They can't attach meaning to symbols per se. And there's a difference between semantics and syntax, but I don't want to bore you to death with that stuff, yeah? But that's something for you to read later. Now, so that's the next point. Next point. Let's focus on the social justice warrior issue, right? Justice. We act as if there's that they act, people act right that, well, rightly so. People act that justice is this thing outside of the personal human being, outside of our individuality, outside of our individual emotions. There's this abstract, universal thing called justice that we could hold on to, right? Does that make sense according to atheistic naturalism? I want you to consider a full experiment, okay? Here's a full experiment. So the full experiment, listen, if you want to guys have a conversation, have it outside, please. I didn't travel 1,000 miles for you to talk over me, man, honestly. I'm not trying to be rude, but just some this courtesy. If you have a valid question, just ask me. I'm more than willing to answer anything you want me to say. If you're frustrated by my use of the word social justice warrior, whatever the case may be, just be frank and authentic with me. If you're not, if it's something else, just raise your hand. I'm well known. I'll give you 3 hours, whatever you want. I'm here for you, okay? So don't be frustrated. Don't go on Twitter. Just talk to me, okay? I'm being honest, because it happens to me a lot. And people love to I'm not saying that's the case here. You could be talking about God knows what. I don't know. Your hijab's nice, your hat's nice, I don't know. But generally speaking, if you have any issues, put your hand up. Honestly, I will address it, okay? So you got my word. So coming back to the point. So this notion that we all believe as human beings, that we believe in justice, right? And we believe that it's not just based on our individual feelings and desires and emotions and limited capacities, but rather it exists outside of those limitations and it's real, right? And we all could hold on to it. Now that for me doesn't really make much sense according to an atheistic philosophical perspective, because if things are just random physical processes, then you can't really have a claim to ultimate justice in that way. Let me explain why. With a thought experiment, imagine you have a Jewish lady in Nazi Germany and she's waiting in the queue to be thrown into the gas chamber. But prior to that, her husband and her sons were killed in front of her. She's eventually killed. Where's her justice? She's just a rearrangement of carbon, decaying, rearrangement of physical processes and stuff, right? There's no light at the end of the tunnel for her. There's no sense of ultimate justice. And you may say, yeah, but we beat the Nazis. We beat the Nazi Germany. The German Nazis, right? We beat them. We took them tied. It's jet lag. We took them to the Nuremberg trials. But fine, but where's the justice for her? She's nothing now, but it's a rearrangement of carbon. You see my point here? So even when you think about things like justice or hope, they can't really be grounded in a worldview that basically just says everything can be explained by physical processes. It becomes very problematic. Let me give you another thing to think about. Give you lots of things to think about here. What about morality? I would argue our sense of morality does not make sense under philosophical naturalism. It makes sense under theism. Right? We all believe killing an innocent 5-year-old, well, all 5-year-olds are innocent anyway. Killing a 5-year-old is morally wrong, right? Good. Thank God. Now, if the whole world was to say to you, killing a 5-year-old is morally good, would it make it morally good? No. So we have this intuition that morals are outside of our limited minds, limited human emotional perspective. And they're not based on a consensus. Because even if the whole world were to say to me, kill a 5-year-old, it's still morally wrong. So in a way, it's outside of personal limitations. But how do you ground that? If this whole world is fundamentally based on, this whole universe is fundamentally based on physical processes, then how can physical processes ground morals to be objective in that sense? They can't. It can only be done with God. God is the only anchor that can ground morals objectively, because he's outside of the universe. He can make the universal moral claim. So from this point of view, we're in trouble. You may say, what about Darwinism? Well, people don't study. That's the problem. They don't study the philosophy of biology. No decent philosopher would say that Darwinism can actually give us a basis for objective morals. No way. Subjective morals, yes. Meaningless morals, yes. Because according to natural selection or the Darwinian mechanism, our morals have been formulated as a response to biological conditions. Even Charles Darwin raised the same point. He said, he gave an extreme example. He said, if we were to be reared under precisely the same conditions as the hive bees, we would think it's okay to rape our fertile daughters. Moving on, if you look at the nurse shark, according to National Geographic, wrestles with its mate and it bites the fin of its mate. Now, if we were reared under the same conditions as the nurse shark, we would think it's okay to rape women, right? And if our morals have been formulated just as a response to the biological conditions, then our morals don't have any meaning anymore. Because the only meaning they have is as a response, rather than anything that's far more profound. And natural selection, it can't give us an objective basis for morals, but it can give us a basis to formulate ethical rules, which is a different story. So we have a big problem here, right? Well, even when it comes to the notion of morality. And any other notion, like if you bring social consensus, biology, moral realism, all these other isms and schisms to explain morality, it doesn't explain it effectively. Sorry? It's a relative term.
Yes, exactly.
So you're more relativist.
Morality basically you can clearly define it on timeline basis. For example, what all crimes, what all things you're mentioning now was a part of society few decades or few hundreds of years before. They were not bad, they were not considered as bad. So what's happening is even morality, even justice, everything is evolving by the human life. So what you're saying now,
That's not true though.
no, it is true. It has been mentioned in Quran even. I would like to bring you to this example where people bury their young daughters, newborn daughters. That was a norm of society at that time. No one was
Yeah,
saying
I think you've confused a few things.
But now, even if you say to a non-Muslim, even in a non-Muslim society, if you say this, everybody feels bad about it. They say it's morally, totally, it's impossible to even have that.
Yeah, no.
And bringing women and all those things were part of norms of the society.
Well, not all societies, but that's neither here or there. I think you've misunderstood something. just because some immoral things have been happening in certain societies, it doesn't mean now morals are relative. It doesn't follow. All you've said is some bad things happen. Well, there you go. My question is,
Society is involved.
no, society,
Justice system is seen now. Listen.
Yeah.
You have to be directed and you have to allow him to.
yeah, you have to listen, bro. You misunderstood everything. Yeah? Just because societies evolve, in your view, which I don't think they've evolved, I think they've digressed in some ways as well. We've become excessively individualistic. We've moved away from the communitarian aspect of society, which is very healthy for society. And a lot of political thinkers and social thinkers actually talking about this abstract individualism that we have that's really destroying our societies in the West. So, it's digressed, right? I know, it's nice to be in the West and, beautiful universities and there's money everywhere and stuff. And sometimes we like to jump on the bandwagon, but it's not all great, right? If you look at what forget social media, what the theorists are talking about, we have a lot of issues. We have a hell of a lot of issues, right? But it's great. I mean, Canada's one of the best countries in the world, in my view. I'm not just saying that because I'm here, but I'm saying it because generally speaking, right? Anyway, so my point is this. Whether you think societies progress towards more good or more bad over time is irrelevant. What we're saying is, given that, do we believe intuitively that some morals are objective? And we all agree, for example, whether it's 5,000 years ago, 500 years ago, or 5 days ago, killing a 5-year-old is morally wrong, regardless of society, regardless of personal opinion. That's what we're saying. Since that's a moral fact for us, if that's a moral fact for us, what can explain that? What grounds that and explains that is not social pressure, because social pressure changes over time and morality will change. It's not objective anymore. It can't be biology because of what I've just mentioned. The only thing that could ground it rationally is God, because God is external to the universe. He can make the universal moral claim, and by definition, He is the source of all good. So I'm talking from an ontological point of view, meaning the source and nature of our morals. How do we ground our morals? What's the source of our morals, given that we believe that some morals are objective? That's the point. Now, whether societies change or not, that's irrelevant to this issue. That's my point. Yes?
For the explanation, can, for example, an atheist say that humans by nature, not by God, by nature, sorry, physical nature, they have feelings, they have sympathy.
Yes,
so
yes.
They like, when they see others suffer, they can understand the
I
suffering
agree.
because
They're right. They're 100% right.
And so they're not like for others what you like for yourself, and this general law that I see.
Yeah, I agree. They can, but
so it can be explained like this. Maybe I know that's
okay. Let me explain what you've slightly misunderstood. We're not saying that they don't have an explanation why we are moral. Of course they have. Yeah, they could explain it by Darwinian mechanism, natural selection. What I'm saying is they can't explain why we believe some morals are objective. There's a difference, right? And what we mean by objective, as I gave the example of the 5-year-old being killed, is that it's not based on our limited emotions or limited minds, and it's not based on social pressure. It's always wrong, regardless. How do we justify the objectivity of such morals? We're not saying, can we explain our ability to formulate morals? That's a different story. Of course you can. But what we're saying is very specific. Can we explain the objectivity of morals? And that's very difficult using biology and social pressure. Yes?
Well, I want to get back to the guy over there. Now he was saying that it was morally acceptable to bury those alive. Well, the Prophet talked about that it was never acceptable. And what I'm trying to get back here, whatever society doesn't decide moral values. Whatever was right, what was right from the beginning is what was now, what was wrong from the beginning.
Sure. Thank you. Yes?
So are you saying that even if societies do deviate from that objective morals,
Societies can be wrong, and we have to accept this. Yeah,
Right,
and
so that,
yeah,
so
of
you're saying
course.
that that's an anomaly and it will generally come back.
It might not.
It
it might not.
come
Yeah.
back, but so my question then is, if large societies are deviating and individuals aren't necessarily being pressured to have that deviation, how do you account for that? Like, they don't.
Of course they have that pressure. Absolutely. Of course they have that pressure.
Like, even if large societies.
Who studies social psychology here? Anyone? You? Okay, I did this nearly more than a decade ago, so it could have changed by now. But basically, the development of the social norm happens based on two main things. It's called informational social influence and normative social influence. Informational social influence is based on your need. We have a desire to be certain. If you're not certain about something, you go to the collective because there's more people saying the same thing, repeating it, so there must be right. So you adopt what society is saying. A normative social influence is where you have the need to belong. And even if society goes against your views, you may suspend your views just to belong. That shapes this, that develops the social norm. So that's why even us, say Muslims, generally speaking, we're supposed to be a little bit more conservative, if you like. We still may have traits of society, of the mainstream society, which is fine. You know, we're part of the mosaic, right? We're here to belong and stuff. But would have dispositions that are in line with society, and that's why to change societies, you have to be a leader, and you have to be someone that people hate by definition. And you just have to accept that. And you got to bring it on. We're compassionate, we're loving, we're tolerant, we have forbearance. But you want to change society, then you're gonna upset a lot of people, right? And that's how it works. And that's why, you're not supposed to be praised when you're alive. You're supposed to be praised when you're dead. Yeah? Look at all the great people who changed society. You think they liked them at that time? No, of course not. Yeah? So don't worry what happens on social media. Right? Just ignore it. Just do what you think is good. Yes, sir.
Just want to let you know that's your water.
Oh, thank you, sir. Yes, brother.
So, so far, we've had a great discussion on evaluating morality from a descriptive versus a prescriptive point of view. But let's say like atheists tried to challenge the Muslim theist and said, how do you respond to the biblical dilemma? And they try to
Beautiful.
demonstrate that God is. They're trying to get us to show that God's commands aren't arbitrary. How should we respond to that?
Yeah, good. So Euthyphro's dilemma. Thanks for bringing it out because I forgot to mention it. Also known as Plato's dilemma or Euthyphro's dilemma is basically this. Is it good? Okay, say fine. If God's the basis, then we have an issue, we have a dilemma. Is it good because God commanded it, or is it good because the commands of God are good? If you take one part of the dilemma, which is it's good because God commanded it, then you're basically saying, well, God could command for you to kill all 80-year-olds, and it'll be good just because he commanded it, right? And that becomes arbitrary. So what they're saying is there is a disconnect between commands and any type of nature. It's just arbitrary. And that we want to be pleased with either. The other part of the dilemma is it good because the commands of God are good? Well, if you already know what good is, to judge God's commands, you don't need God's commands anymore. Get it? So how do you solve the dilemma? Very simple. God is good. In the Islamic tradition, he is Al-Bar. He is the source of all goodness. And his commands are the basis of good, but not in an arbitrary way, because his commands are a derivative of his will, and his will doesn't contradict his nature, and he is the source of all goodness. And you may think, okay, but why is he the source of all goodness? Because he's the only being worthy of worship. And the only being worthy of worship is the highest moral being. He defines what good is from that point of view. So he breaks the dilemma. The dilemma is shot on the floor. Bang, bang, bang.
Could you repeat that?
Sorry?
Could you repeat that?
Yeah, so, most of this stuff is on my website. I'll give you the thing. There's quite a few essays on there. Or you can just buy my book, but since you're a student, you go to my website. This is free. Okay? So, Euthyphro's dilemma is So we believe the commands of good are the basis for objective morals. Right. Well, here's a dilemma. Is it good because God commanded it, or is it good because the commands of God are good? If it's good because God commanded it, then it becomes arbitrary because God can command anything, and there should be nothing that we should recognize as objective good anymore. It's just based on His commands, not based on something that we could rationalize. Now, if it's the other part of the dilemma, which is, the commands of God are good, then there's a problem here because you have an external standard of good away from God to judge His commands. So therefore, you don't need His commands anymore to know what good is. The way to break that dilemma is basically saying, well, actually, God is good, and His commands are derivative of His will, which doesn't contradict His nature, which is the source of all goodness. Cool. Yes, sir.
Yeah. You said that God was the highest moral authority. So if I start reading the Quran tells me that both the Quran and the Hadith are God's are the way to understanding what God tells me. And when I read the Hadiths and it says that we should be stoning homosexuals to death, how can it be that the highest moral authority tells me that I should be stoning other people to death because of their sexuality?
I'm not aware of any hadith that talks about that.
No, I have the Bukhari hadith over here, and I can read it to you. Narrated. Can you pronounce this, please? The Prophet, peace be upon him, said, if you find anyone doing as Lot's people did, kill the one who does it and the one to whom it's done. If a man who is not married is seized committing sodomy, he will be stoned to death. This is curiosity with all of this.
Yeah, but there's a few things here. Number one, it doesn't mention homosexuality.
What's sodomy then?
Well, you could do that with a woman as well. So listen to this, right?
Isn't it forbidden in the Quran?
Yeah, well, yeah, obviously. But I'm trying to explain. I'm trying to make you see things in a different dimension, right? Islam doesn't judge people by their sexuality. Okay, this is very important. This is a very new way of thinking about the human being. Like, here is the heterosexual community. Here is the homosexual community. Here is this community, that community. We make all of these, we segregate society to these human construct labels. We don't judge someone for having homosexual tendencies. That's not the Islamic. Whoever does that, that's not Islamic, right? Islam just has a penal code to preserve its society, okay? So its penal code is a mechanism to preserve what it has basically dictated how society should run, right? And every society has mechanisms to preserve its position on how society should be run. Now, no one is saying that everyone's going to go into someone's house and spy on them. In actual fact, that's not the court of law in Islam. It's not allowed, right? So when you see things like this, say there's a tradition that says this. And by the way, I'm going to explain why I think that tradition is misunderstood in a bit. But just say you take that for face value. It's not saying if you find a homosexual, do this to them. It's not saying that. It's saying if people in public and there are 4 witnesses to view the act of sodomy, and those 4 witnesses are trustworthy and they described everything in exactly the same way, there's no discrepancy, then there is a possibility of having this punishment.
With men too, or with
Men, women, anything probably, I don't know. Yeah.
In the Quran, I think it's only with women.
Yeah, but this is the point. I want to teach you something about how. Yeah, I want to. No, it's not with women, by the way.
No, I think it says only with
It doesn't.
Okay. Well,
So let me show you this. Men and
I just
women.
want to raise it out.
Yeah, it's men and women. All right.
Sure.
So let me just show you something. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me just show you something about Islamic law. Just like Canadian law, British law works very similar. In actual fact, the West took it from Islam, and I'll tell you what I mean by that. Yeah. So we have, say statements X, Y, Z from the Quran. Yeah. And we have statements A, B, C from the Hadith literature, which are the statements of the Prophet Muhammad upon his peace. in Islamic jurisprudence, we don't take statement C and start to run away with it, right? Maybe I'm running, woo, yeah? We don't do things like that. And this is why what you've just done, Muslims don't really appreciate it, not because you don't have a right to, you do, because we have a very profound legal system. Traditionally, so
do you
what?
think the main four traditions within Sunni Islam are, do they have main?
No, I'm actually teaching you what they did, yeah? So let me just go back to basics,
Sure.
right? Forget the results, look at the methodology, right?
Yeah.
So what they would do, they would look at all the evidences together, right? And then they would outweigh evidences, and there's all these different types of principles in order to formulate an answer for Islamic jurisprudence, right?
Yeah.
Now, if someone goes on Google and picks one hadith, a Muslim would rightly say, well, Islam is not based on one hadith. In actual fact, Islam is not even based on one verse, right? You have to see everything together from that point of view. So, this is why sometimes it's unhelpful. It's like going to the statute law book in Britain and saying, look, oh my God, have you seen this law? And then a judge would say, well, you know nothing about law because law is not based on one statute. You have to bring everything together and analyze and assess. Similarly with Islam.
Would you think is this a contentious issue? Would you say it's controversial, or would you say that most scholars would agree?
What that homosexuality is forbidden?
Yes.
It's controversial in a Western society,
Okay.
in a liberal society, but it's not controversial in Islamic society. So it doesn't mean that we don't believe that human beings. See, it's a bit complex here because we don't even have a concept of homosexuality per se, right? In terms of we don't define people by their sexuality. People have desires and needs, right? There are some guys in this room, they may want to, I don't know, marry 10 women, but they can't, right? Islam says, sorry, you got to stop at 4, yeah?
So sodomy is pretty clear.
Yeah, I know
it applies to some kind
No.
of reference out there.
Yeah, but that's the
and
problem.
We all know. what
No,
it
no, no.
means.
That's the problem with the Arabic and
Yeah.
English.
Yeah, I'm sure there are. Would you?
Okay, let me make it easy for you. I adopt the opinion that homosexuals don't get punished. It's a classical Hanafi opinion. That's one of the schools of thought. That's the opinion I follow. They don't get punished. Okay. So yeah. So I'm giving you my opinion to show you there are another opinion. But I'm giving you principles rather than opinions. Because you give people fish, but they'll get hungry very quickly. But if you teach them how to fish, then they could feed themselves for a long time. So I want to give you principles on how to understand Islam. Do you see my point? And navigate through the space that we have in the West, which, yes, there are going to be difficult issues. Point number 1, if someone has same-sex attraction, that's not a problem per se. You have it, there you go. Whether it's genetic, whether it's social, whether it's this, it's irrelevant. You've got it, right? Khalas. We're human beings, we have desires, man. You got desires, I got desires, you got desires, right? He doesn't look like he's got desires. But he's got desires. So the point is, bro, we all have desires. What Islam teaches us is, look, no one's judging you for having desires. No one's judging you for falling in love with a man or woman or anything. No one's judging you on that. See, this is very important. But what we're saying is, the public sexual manifestation of this sexual act is forbidden in an Islamic society. That's all it's saying. Do you see my point? And it's very nuanced here. Even in the classical fiqh books, the classical jurisprudence books, it would say you just can't do this act in public. You get caught, you'd have to go for a court of law. That's it.
So
And the irony is, that doesn't even happen in Canada. When was the last time you went out in Toronto and you saw a bunch of women or men or whatever doing things?
Of course, but it's completely different.
Yeah, but that's the point. But even that's the point. So you have to understand that Islam has provided certain what you call hudud, boundaries and mechanisms to preserve society. What you do at home on your own is absolutely up to you, right? Obviously, it's still considered a sin from a spiritual point of view, but our discussion here is social, yeah? And even in saying this, you still want to appreciate because fundamentally the legal social structure of Islam is fundamentally different. Like in a liberal society, for example, they don't really have a conception of the good life. They say, do what you want as long as you don't harm anyone, right? Islam is not really atomistic from that point of view. It has a different type of social philosophy. it says no, there is a conception of the good life, and it also says that we don't reduce society to spice individuals. There's a bit more of a dynamic going on, right? So it differs from the liberal tradition in some way, and we should create space to have these discussions, because even in England, I have to educate Muslims. Muslims have this very kind of wrong view even on the LGBT community. Hey, bro, relax, man. Like, I used to work with lots of homosexuals. They're some of the best people I've ever worked with. Some of them, from an outward behavior point of view, they're some of the most moral. So what I try and teach, or not teach, it's the wrong word to use, it sounds like I'm an authority, but what I try and advise is people are human beings, they have rights and needs. Your job, if you have a spiritual, social position, is articulate to someone with compassion and tolerance. And that's what we want to do. So, yeah, no one's hating, man, don't worry.
No, I'm not hating.
No, I'm saying no one's hating. Like, what I'm trying to say is it's very complex to unravel these things because we live in a very ideological world. You type in a sum on Google, this would happen. You type this on Google, you get something else. And we live in a very Google world, right? Social media world. And we take little, statements from people and we throw at them. You said this, you must be like that. And we reduce people to their shortcomings. We don't reduce them to their potential. And it's a very sad world we're living at the moment, right? So that's why we have to have very long conversations about principles and what this means. Now, it doesn't mean that now Islam all of a sudden accepts, for example, same-sex marriage from a Islamic jurisprudence point of view. It doesn't mean that. But at least now you see that there is some kind of intellectual validity behind how they've decided certain things and what the basis of their things are. Do you see? So it becomes a little bit more, we can have a conversation now. Do you see my point? And I still haven't given you the full answer yet. But I think what this shows is good, people should have coffee, man. People should break bread and discuss. That's my point, you see? But yeah, so, anyway, yes, sir.
I wanted to ask you what morality that you talked about before. So you're saying that objective morality exists and atheists can't necessarily prove it. Or like killing a 5-year-old.
No. I'm not saying they can't prove it. I'm saying philosophical naturalism, atheistic naturalism, that believes everything can be explained by physical processes, that cannot explain our intuitions of objective moral truths.
Can we, for the sake of argument, say that, okay, whatever atheists believe, they believe, and they also believe that they can rationalize?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so once we accept that they can rationalize, then they can develop morals, right? You're saying that a lot of these morals are subjective.
Yes.
Okay, but objective morals, couldn't you say, your example was, if the whole world told somebody to kill a 5-year-old, would they kill him? Would it become morally correct to kill him? But that will never happen, right? And because that will never happen, it will never, can't you say that nobody is going to tell you to kill a 5-year-old, and because nobody is going to tell you to kill a 5-year-old, or nobody is going to see that killing a 5-year-old is okay, that statistically everybody agrees, and if statistically everybody agrees that killing a 5-year-old is wrong, then you can call it an objective moral. And that could be rationalized by an atheist if they believe that they can rationalize.
Good. So they say social pressure, but there's a problem here. Look at Nazi Germany, right? Now, there was some kind of social pressure doesn't mean consensus, but there was some kind of social pressure that they said Jewish people are like this,
But
and they should.
localized. It wasn't, nobody in this whole world is going to tell you to kill a 5-year-old.
It's irrelevant if it was localized. It was part of their society. That's the point.
Okay.
And they adopted that view because of social pressure. Now, if the philosophy behind social pressure is true, that is a basis to formulate your morals, then you have a problem with Nazi Germany. That's my point.
I believe, I'm completely with you. One of the reasons why I believe in God is because there has to be an objective justice system and objective morals. That's one of the reasons why.
Yeah, sure. But what I'm trying to say is,
but at the same time, you can come to these morals as long as
okay.
you're rational.
Now you've conflated two things. You've conflated moral epistemology with moral ontology. Moral epistemology is how to know what's good. Moral ontology is what is the source and nature of good. Two different things. So yes, I totally agree they can come to understand what good. And let me be honest with you. I've met some atheists who have far more better behavior than Muslims. Full stop. So it's not about that, right? Allah says in the Quran, people are different. People are not the same. There's good and bad Jews and Christians, good and bad atheists, good and bad this, good and bad Muslims. Everyone's different. We're human beings, yeah? So finding out what is good and bad and developing your morals, anyone could do that. What I'm saying is, philosophically, does your philosophical worldview justify, or does it ground your understanding of objective morals? That's the point. Not do you believe that is moral, but rather, once you believe it's moral and you believe it's objective, how can you ground it? You can't ground it by physical processes, social pressure, or biology. You can only ground it in God because of the nature of God. That's the point. No, statistics is different, bro. You're missing the argument here. What you're saying is, here are societies, they've formulated what is good. That's irrelevant. They could get it right, they could get it wrong. My point is, if we believe that amoral is outside of our limited minds and emotions, and it's objective in that sense, it requires some grounding. How do you ground it? How do you make that moral now objective? Or the examples you've just given me is that societies have understood what is good, but they haven't given a basis for why that good is objective. And if you think it's only social pressure, then there's a big problem philosophically, because when social pressure changes, your morals change, which means that they're subject to inevitable social changes. Yes, sir. We're going to end on this because I need to go to sleep.
So if I understand your argument correctly, you're saying that the justification for morality with capital M, by necessity, must come from some divine being. For me, at least, it raises another question, which is that if that is the case, then the number of moralities in the world are multiplied by the number of deities that humanity believes in. So the real question is, well, which of those moralities is the correct one? Because
that's a different question.
But we're getting to like the deeper point at this stage. Once, let's say,
no, it's a different point. It's about moral epistemology. Then now you're asking what is good. First we asked what's the source of good. Now you're asking what is good. That's a different question. That's more epistemology,
right?
Knowing what good is. But and what we're saying, we're not saying any deity, by the way. It's usually the traditional conception of the deity. All-powerful, all-knowing, all-good being, right? Because some other deities don't have those attributes, okay? But yeah, it's a valid question to have. We don't have time for it now. But just in summary, guys, the way I formulated this, which I think was very good, interacting, discussing, and just planting seeds, is that, sometimes I don't like giving these lectures and thinking that everyone's going to agree with you when they go home. I think it's a very bad way of interacting with an audience. And I wanted to, get you to think about things like rationality, things like atheistic naturalism, things like value, things like ultimate justice, things like morality. So those things are just playing in your mind, and you may end up waking up tomorrow disagreeing with me, saying, "What an arrogant idiot!" Right? Fair enough. I am. Big deal. My sincere desire was to get you to think, and hopefully we've achieved that. And keep on thinking, and stay compassionate together, even if you disagree, and stay tolerant and forbearing, and be good to each other. Okay? Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.